What is the trashiest thing you've ever witnessed? Story 1. I once had a close friend whose family was deeply troubled. My parents usually never allowed me to spend the night at her place, but on one occasion my mother made an exception. That turned out to be a mistake. That evening we were watching a movie in the living room. My friend eventually fell asleep, leaving me alone with her brother. After a while he whispered for me to look. When I turned, I was met with something unsettling that caught me completely off guard. His behavior and expression left me shocked, and the memory of that moment has stayed with me ever since. Then he started pressuring me until I told him I would wake up his sister and tell her if he did not stop. He quit. When the movie was over, I woke her up and said we should go to bed. So the two of us went upstairs to her bedroom. Luckily for me, her brother's room was downstairs. Now her parents had newspaper laid out on the floor in the corner of her room and a coffee can sitting in the middle of it. I did not ask her why. I woke up in the middle of the night and needed to use the bathroom. I made my way down the stairs. Halfway down, I saw her mother lying on the couch with her nightgown pulled up and her father standing in front of her. The mother looked at me, whispered something, and the father turned and saw me. He quickly adjusted himself and ran toward me yelling, "Get back upstairs!" I told him I needed to use the bathroom. He yelled, "That is what the coffee can in the bedroom is for." I ran to the bathroom, shut the door, turned on the light, watched the cockroaches scatter, and went as quickly as I could. I ran back up to the bedroom and lay awake all night. In the morning, I went to the kitchen and used the phone to call my mother to come get me as soon as possible, while watching my friend's mother with a gallon jug of milk, half full, adding water to it until the jug was full. Story 2. I foolishly bought my girlfriend at the time Britney Spears tickets in Newark, with Pussycat Dolls as the opening act. This was maybe 10 years ago. Anyway, she was a terrible driver and did not have many friends, so she ended up asking me to go with her so I could drive and she would have company. I agreed. We got there. Everything was fine. Luckily, I brought earplugs and they were selling beer at a couple of stands. Then came the bathroom break. Keep in mind, I was one of maybe 10 men in the building, so conveniently there was no line outside the bathroom. When I walked in, I saw lines of young girls in every direction, using the urinals, the sinks, just everywhere. They all looked up at me, smirked, and went back to what they were doing. I immediately backed out and asked a staff member if I could use a back bathroom or something, which they allowed. I now have the strange memory of walking into a scene that looked completely out of control at a Britney Spears concert, and it has stayed with me for life. Story 3. When I was 16, my mother joined a group for single professional mothers. She met with the organizers, and they invited her to an event they had scheduled for the next evening. The event was a screening of First Wives Club at a historic theater, and they had arranged for local firefighters to volunteer as ushers. They were to greet each member with a rose and a glass of champagne, and then escort her to her seat. But you asked for messy, not classy, right? Stay with me here. My mother did not drive, so I dropped her off and promised to pick her up in 2 hours. 40 minutes later, I was back at the theater, my little brother in tow, looking at a large crowd of police officers and curious onlookers. My mom had called to tell me there had been an incident, and could I please come get her? This was before cell phones, so we marched up to an amused-looking officer who escorted us into the theater. Inside, we were greeted by the sight of a dozen or so well-dressed, scuffed up, and very intoxicated middle-aged women in handcuffs, and many very angry, rumpled firefighters. Apparently, quite a few of the club members had overindulged in the free champagne and asked the firefighters to demonstrate how quickly they could suit up. The firefighters obliged them by stripping off their gear. This was not enough for the women. They wanted more. While Diane Keaton shrieked at her cheating husband on screen, these inebriated single moms decided to help the firefighters with the rest of their clothes. No was not an option, and they were very forceful. That is about when the police were called. According to the officer escorting us, when they arrived, the lobby was a scene of utter chaos. High heels had been kicked off. Hair was a mess. Alarmed firemen scratched up and clothing torn. These men had been trained to enter burning buildings. They had not been prepared for something like this. These were disasters of a different sort. My officer friend pulled my mom out of a side office where she had been hiding with a couple of other women, and we were sent on our way. For years after, anytime my mom got on me about something, I would bring up the time I had to bring my 7-year-old brother to rescue her from that unforgettable night. Story 4. I went to a wedding in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. Great wedding at a golf course, but the reception ended at 10. So we went to one of the local bars that we had been at the previous night. To frame the story, I was in a car with 3 other friends of mine. The 4 of us were all wearing the typical post-wedding attire, dress pants and dress shirts with the sleeves rolled up, no ties, and untucked shirts. Kind of how you get towards the end of a wedding reception. The bar itself was definitely a small country town bar. So we pulled up to a bar called the Bear Moose Inn that sat on the side of a country road. As we pulled in, my headlights beamed directly on a young couple who were being very intimate. The girl was partially dressed, bouncing on top of the guy. They were right there on top of one of those crushed rock parking lots. No attempt to get privacy or, at least not be directly in line with where people pulled into the parking lot. We then all walked inside, waiting for our other friends to show up. I immediately realized that we did not fit in given our attire. It was the first time in my life where the types of people who acted like that in a bar parking lot fit in more at a place than I did. Story 5. I am a paramedic, and we got called for an active maternity case. As we pulled up, there were 4 police officers outside looking completely panicked, which is normally a sign that there is something unusual going on inside. Because normally visions of press releases, medals, and recognition dance in their heads at maternity calls. We went inside to find a 5th officer, a woman standing in mute horror. The mother was standing there with the baby on the ground, not breathing, umbilical cord still attached. In her hand, she was still holding a pipe. As we walked up, the placenta fell out, which for anyone who knows is a sign that this was not her first, second, or third time. We found out later that this was child number 7 with father number 5. My team went to work on the baby, the other crew went to work on the mother. It turned out she had been using substances all night, and when the baby arrived, she thought nothing of the fact that he was blue. Then this conversation happened. "Isn't my baby beautiful? He is that color because his father is black." My partner, who is a legendary smart aleck, responded with, "Honey, unless his father is a Smurf, he is not supposed to be that color." So we worked on the child, ventilated him, got IV access, and he rapidly improved. We got him out to my ambulance and package. My partner went back in to get the placenta and then had to fight the woman's giant pet rabbit for it. The child did fine and was placed into foster care. Story 6. In my hometown in a rural southern state in the United States, my school was very much abstinence-only education and could not figure out why we had so many pregnant students and young fathers. So it was pretty common to hear a 16-year-old talk about their child. Back in my first year of high school, a new student joined our class. She immediately stood out, not only because of her situation, but also because of the way she carried herself. She often leaned into certain cliches people associated with small-town life. She spoke constantly about relationships, distancing herself from past troubles, while insisting she had turned things around. In school, she often clashed with teachers, skipped work, and pushed boundaries. At times, she declared she was destined for bigger things, though she never said how. Her behavior raised eyebrows, from breaking rules to making comments that didn't sit well with anyone. It left us all unsure whether to feel worried for her, irritated by her, or both. What I remember most is how chaotic her presence felt and how unprepared she seemed for the challenges ahead. I saw her around a lot because it was a small town, and she was always screaming and yelling about something, cursing at people who looked at her, hanging out in the Walmart parking lot with her chest exposed, lit cigarette dangling from her lips, pregnant belly on display, claimed she was tanning. Eventually, she stopped coming to school, and I saw her making out with a man twice her age over summer break. She looked pregnant again. She saw me and asked for a cigarette, then told me she had run away from her parents' house and that they, pointing to the much older man next to her, were running away to get married and have their child. She proceeded to ask me for money and offered to have her guy sell me drugs. He was missing at least 3 visible teeth. She never did make it big. Story 7. My car was rear-ended by a driver who was clearly not paying attention while I was at a red light, pushing my car into the vehicle in front of me. Now let that sink in. My car's rear end was completely demolished and the front of my car collided with another vehicle. When the police came, suddenly the 3 people in the front car all had terrible whiplash and needed to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance. All while I watched, standing on the side of the road, telling the officers what happened. Apparently, the at-fault car tried to get an appeal, and I was summoned to court with the 3 other people in the front car. I was well-dressed and got there early. The 3 of them showed up in casual clothes, miraculously healed from their neck trauma, and just commenting and making disapproving remarks while the at-fault guy was talking with the judge. I guess they did not recognize I was also involved, since I was the only one who lost my car that day, sitting right beside them. Oh, and I also noticed that they changed the name of the driver to the man who had been in the back seat at the time. They probably claimed a large amount of disability payment from that. Meanwhile, I lost my car. It is amazing how greedy some people can be. Story 8. I was driving one day, slow-crawling city traffic, warm with summer sun so the windows were down. The radio was up, but while at a stoplight, I could hear an argument brewing between a man and a woman at a bus stop 2 lanes over. I turned the volume down. I hated that I was interested in what the argument was about. There were no other cars at the light with me. The woman had a daughter, maybe 5 years old, sitting at the far end of the bus stop bench, while the mother sat closer to the pacing man. From muted and muffled voices through city sounds, I could tell they were some sort of couple. She was pregnant, perhaps with his child. He dressed like he thought he was a celebrity on the street, with a straight-brimmed Lakers cap cocked to the side of his forehead, a Clippers oversized jersey, and full-sleeve tattoos. She was dressed more casually, almost with a sad plainness to it. She looked tired, like she had been in this argument, or in this position, countless other times, and knew her participation was pointless. The light was about to turn green, while I was wondering the stories of each of them. How did they get here? Why did he choose her? Why did she choose him? As the light turned green, the woman stood to address her child at the opposite end of the bench. Frustrated, she vented toward her little girl. As the cars began to move, I was still watching, still listening to him verbally crush her to the pavement. As I started to accelerate, hoping this would end before they got on the upcoming bus, I saw from the corner of my eye a blur of motion from him to her, the resulting sound I will never forget. The heavy thud of a punch to her face and her gasping moan. I saw her stumble and fall, the man still yelling at her. By then, my car was in motion, and before I knew it, I was past the intersection, still trying to comprehend what I had just witnessed. I felt her pain, I saw her collapse, and after that, I could only imagine. And I did nothing else about it. I did not call anyone. I did not do anything. I have lived with this for about 7 years now. It never goes away. I drive by that same bus stop once a month, perhaps. I still see the shadows of that day on the fading advertisements. My lack of action that day, to help someone very much in need, is the worst thing I have ever carried with me. Story 9. I went to a party in high school with people I knew were a little reckless. I arrived maybe an hour in, and one guy was completely drunk, stumbling up to each girl there, and essentially falling on them while trying to kiss them. He did this maybe 4 or 5 times in 30 minutes, and the girls seemed into it at first. Each one only stopped when their friends pulled them away. Finally, this guy decided to tackle the host of the party, it was her birthday, and started kissing her. This angered another guy there who liked the host, so he got mad and punched a hole in the wall. They all collectively and drunkenly decided to fix the hole by hanging a cowboy hat over it. I had never been to a high school party before, so my plan had been to smoke and drink a little and just enjoy whatever went down. But I was not really sure what to do about all this, so I ended up just sitting on a half wall in the middle of it. Somewhere in the time that the guy punched the wall, the host had gone to her room with the drunk guy, and they clearly had been together. She walked out of her room completely unclothed while putting on a robe. When she came out, the guy who punched the wall was sitting on the living room floor, drinking all the booze in the house to handle the pain from breaking his hand. The host girl saw this, walked past into the kitchen, then came back out and did a double take at the cowboy hat on the wall. She lifted it up, screamed, yelled at the guy. Then after that, a song came on that they liked, so all the girls danced. Then the guy with the broken hand started grinding on the host girl, and they began going at it in the middle of the living room. They did not care who was around. I think I just talked with people I knew right next to the two of them on the floor. I should explain that I was very high, and had taken maybe 4 or 5 shots of something, so I was sort of just going with the flow. At some point, the guy with a broken hand asked for gum because, as he said, his mouth tasted bad. Then I went home. Story 10. I had a friend in elementary and middle school who was honestly a very sweet girl. Unfortunately, the house she came from was filthy, so she and her clothes and all her belongings smelled terribly. I never mentioned it, but plenty of people did because kids can be cruel. Fortunately, I was obnoxious enough that people disliked me more than her, and that kind of drew her attention toward me. I think that is part of why she could relax around me. Anyway, her family was pretty awful, even from the outside before you knew the details. My mom would never let me spend the night over there. She always insisted this friend come to our house. She later told me it was so she could have at least one night once in a while to be in a quiet, clean house. If only she had known what the rest of the family was like. One time she did let me stay there. I do not even like to think about what I saw. To give you some idea how bad it was, years later the house was demolished rather than renovated. It had earned a nickname in town. There were dead animals under furniture. Mold spread all throughout the walls. I did not see those things when I was there, but I did see animal mess everywhere. Trash, rotting food left out, and her father's adult magazines left openly on the computer. But the really awful part was not just that these people lived in filth, it was how they treated their only daughter. I sat through a dinner where her parents discussed which brother they would take when they divorced. Not as a joke, they were actually divorcing. They said in front of me, in front of my friend, that no, the other one could take her. It was like watching a disturbing game of hot potato. The day we went to an amusement park for her birthday, her mother got angry over something. I cannot even remember what. Something meaningless. While my friend was in the bathroom, her mother just exploded. She sat there ranting to a bunch of 11-year-old girls about some of the foulest things an adult can say about a child. And the other girls agreed, probably because they were scared of this woman. I know my friend could hear her mother. She was only a few feet away. To this day, I cannot imagine how people can be like that. That family was rotten through and through. I do not know how their daughter was so sweet and sincere. Story 11. I work at a pawn shop, and I think it was my second or third week there, when this guy started showing up every day with some broken tool, trying to get money for drugs. And every day we would tell him we could not give him anything for it, and he would leave and try again the next day. But the next time he came in, he was clearly drunk and had fresh marks on his arms. And this time he had some gold. We tested it, and of course it was fake. He had to wait for his ride, so he started leaning on some saddles we had for sale on benches to keep himself upright. At this point, he was wearing an open button-down shirt with nothing underneath and some stained plaid shorts. As he leaned, his shorts started to fall, and I tried to look away, but it was like a car crash. No matter how bad, you do not want to look. Within a second, they fell straight down. All I saw was a terrible stain all over his clothes. If he had reacted and been embarrassed, I would not be telling this story. But this man had no shame. He said, "Why are you yelling at me? A man has to do what a man has to do." Then pulled up his pants and walked straight out into the parking lot to wait on his buddy in plain view of a very busy restaurant. Needless to say, I see a lot of strange and trashy things working in a pawn shop, but that takes the cake by far. Story 12. Last summer, I was in an Uber from the city center to the outer districts. There were 3 of us, Jenny, Kyle, and myself. We could have taken the subway for far less than the Uber, but Jenny insisted on the ride because she did not want to walk, and she said she would pay for it. So I sat in the front, Jenny and Kyle were in the back making out, and the driver seemed oblivious. About 10 minutes in, Jenny stopped making out with Kyle and said, "I know you have a girlfriend, so are you doing this because you are sleazy or because I am just so pretty you cannot control yourself?" And did a dramatic hair flip. He responded, "You are just so pretty." "Prettier than her?" she asked, while my eyes rolled so hard I got a headache. "Yeah," he said back, and they continued making out. Then about 20 minutes later, I stopped hearing kissing and started hearing something else. I froze. I told myself it was not happening. I looked back, and sure enough, Jenny was doing something completely inappropriate for the back seat of an Uber. I wanted to scream, but I did not want to get us kicked out of the ride. so I bit my tongue and hoped nothing worse would happen. Eventually, we got to our apartment. The driver either did not notice or did not care, and we got out. Jenny saw the $60 Uber bill and lost it, saying she was not paying for it, and made Kyle cover it. Later that night, they continued their antics on the main staircase of the apartment. Story 13. Last night, when I saw two girls drunkenly being overly aggressive while making out, it was not at all what you would expect. The story does not stop there, so hold on because it gets wilder. After the drunk girls stopped kissing each other, the tall one walked over to our table. Let us call her Sarah. She stumbled over, clearly very intoxicated. She put her arm around me and also my friend who was a girl. Sarah groaned, "I am so turned on right now." She then started sweet-talking my friend Kara, the girl sitting next to me. Kara got up and went to the restroom to avoid the situation. Well, Sarah chased her down into the bathroom and apparently crawled under the stall door to corner her. I was thinking, this girl just crawled on a bathroom floor at a bar. That is disgusting. When Kara came back out of the bathroom, Sarah was behind her without her top, shoes off, looking a complete mess. At this point, I was laughing, so I asked Sarah to put her top back on and clean herself up. Sarah looked at me and said, "I am from Middletown. Do not mess with me." For context, Middletown is a city in southwest Ohio with a reputation for being rough. I replied, "Darling, nobody's trying to mess with you. We are just trying to get you out of here." She then grabbed me by the neck and tried to go in for a kiss, and I pushed her off. She fell down and started to cry. Nobody cared because everyone knew I was in the right. So Sarah got up and walked out into the stormy night, never to be seen again. Story 14. I had a friend who one day told our group that a guy we knew from school was back after 6 months in the Navy. This friend was much closer to him than the rest of us, and he suggested we all go on a night out together. We were all about 19 when this happened and lived in Newcastle, a city in the United Kingdom known as a big party city. I do not remember too much about what happened until around 2 in the morning. We were in a pretty grimy nightclub when my friend tapped me on the shoulder and pointed behind me, completely shocked. I turned to see the Navy guy tearing at a girl's tights in the middle of the dance floor, eventually ripping them open and becoming very handsy. All the while, the two of them were sloppily making out, bumping into each other so hard that one of them ended up with a bleeding lip. So while they continued, blood was being smeared all over them. A good couple dozen people had stopped what they were doing and formed a circle, watching in either disgust or morbid curiosity. At that point, we decided it might be best to get him out of there. Unfortunately, this was not the end. The girl had gotten separated from her friends and ended up following us out into the street. One of my mates was so drunk he was barely aware of what was happening, so when the girl approached him with blood still smeared across her face, he did not put up much resistance when she started trying to kiss him. Navy guy took offense to this and started shouting at my mate for getting involved with the girl he had just been with, while my mate could only respond with a blank stare that said, "What on earth is happening right now?" The girl burst into tears, and those of us still sober enough to comprehend the train wreck just stood there, stunned and amused. Once things calmed down, we tried to get the girl back to her friends, but since she was too drunk to help herself, we left her at one of the rescue points that cities in England have for intoxicated people and called it a night. I have not gone out with the Navy guy since. Perhaps that is for the best. Story 15. When I was a teenager, I got into some trouble and was given 160 hours of community service. I decided to serve my time at a donation store, arranging shelves and just passing the days as my sentence wore down. The first few shifts saw some odd events with thefts and public meltdowns. Once, I caught a man doing something inappropriate in the ladies' aisle, but in general, it was pretty calm. A few shifts in, I got to know this girl who was also there serving time. She was pretty cute, and I admittedly flirted with her, even though I felt she was a bit rough around the edges. One day, we were sitting at a table in the back talking, when she told me she was going to find a way out of her remaining community service. She got up, walked over to the store manager's office, asked if she could step in to chat, and closed the door. Soon after, noises became audible, thumping started, and suddenly the door came ajar. I turned around and saw her straddling the manager, completely shameless about it. Apparently, the only attention they gave was to each other, because they paid no mind that I was watching from only a few yards away. I sat there frozen, not sure if I should leave and give them privacy or just wait. Eventually, the manager rolled his chair around the desk and slammed the door shut. I finished my lunch, and several minutes later, she walked out grinning at me and waved goodbye. The manager walked up to me and asked how much community service I had remaining, then disappeared into his office. A moment later, he emerged with a bundle of papers signed and dated for the next 6 months, showing my hours completed. It carried the obvious message that I had seen nothing. With a few more words exchanged, I walked out of the building and never looked back. Sadly, I never got to thank that girl. Story 16. One night I was dragged to the skeeziest bar in town with a group of friends. A woman in her 20s was there dancing with a flimsy bandage on her foot. The floor was dirty, her bandage was soaked in blood, and she was leaving stain marks all over the place. Nobody stopped her. She was clearly there to have a wild night, giving off that kind of energy. Eventually, she found her way to our group, still bleeding badly from the foot, leaving small pools wherever she stepped. We insisted she go to the emergency room or at least apply more bandage, but she acted like it was no big deal while hitting on a friend of my cousin, a guy none of us really knew. We asked what happened, and she casually said she had smashed her foot through her glass coffee table before heading out to the bar. Yes, through a glass table, then straight out to party. She and my cousin's friend kept talking as the rest of us were ready to leave. They kept flirting a bit until he eventually said he was going to run her to the emergency room. He seemed serious and she agreed, so we checked that she was willing. She was drunk but very clear she wanted to go. He had driven alone, so he asked us to stay at the bar until he got back. She refused an ambulance because of the cost and seemed eager to leave with him, so we relaxed. We stayed a few more minutes, but the bar was too grimy, so we decided to head out. As we walked to the SUV most of us were riding in, we heard noises coming from the parking lot. We opened the door to see my cousin's friend with the woman in the back seat. His back and much of the car were smeared with blood from her foot. It looked surreal, like something out of a crime scene. They both shouted at us to shut the door and give them a few minutes. Our friend, the owner of the car, completely freaked out seeing his vehicle destroyed like that. The rest of us stood there in shock. Soon the police arrived, drawing their weapons because they thought an attack was happening, given the man was covered in blood and the woman was half undressed, screaming at everyone that it was not a big deal. EMTs were called. The scene was chaos. During the commotion, my cousin's friend disappeared in his own car, leaving the mess behind. He was eventually tracked down and charged with destruction of property, having to pay for the SUV to be professionally restored. Still, my friend sold it soon after. The so-called couple actually dated for a few months after, unbelievably. Later, at a court hearing over the damages, she was still angry that anyone would care about the blood in the car. My buddy told me she might have been even crazier sober than drunk. A few months later, I saw her at the grocery store, already clinging to another guy. Their story was over, but the memory of that night was unforgettable. Story 17. When I was 18, and a few of my friends were the same age, one of them had just turned 18. My friend Kevin decided we should go to a strip club to celebrate our friend Turtle's birthday. It was not a classy place at all, more of a shack than a club. On this Friday night, there were only 2 dancers. The first girl still had stitches from a medical procedure, and she was not really dancing, just swaying uncomfortably. After a few minutes, she left the stage in distress. The second girl came out, looking very strung out, with her arms full of marks. She kept adjusting her outfit and seemed very distracted. Finally, it became clear she was extremely uncomfortable. She struggled with it for several minutes before tossing something aside in plain view, leaving the entire room in shock. My friends and I were speechless and disgusted, but Kevin, who came up with the idea, thought it was hilarious. We promptly left, though Kevin could not understand why. Monday at school, our friend Turtle told us he was coming out of the closet. I am pretty sure that Friday night pushed him over the edge. Not that he would not have come out eventually, but that night left no question. I have never been in a strip club since, and will never go in one again. I even refused to go to one for my bachelor party. Story 18. One late evening before heading home, I asked a waiter at a closing restaurant if I could quickly use the men's room, since I had a long drive. As I approached the restroom, I could hear strange noises coming from the women's room. For a moment, I thought about turning around, but there was a sense of urgency, so I went in quickly to do my business. While I was there, the noises grew louder. I tried to finish as fast as possible. Before I could leave, the sound stopped abruptly, and as I made my way out, a man came rushing around the corner in complete disarray, adjusting himself as he hurried along. From his clothes, I realized it was the manager, who I presumed had been involved with one of the waitresses. We both knew what had just transpired, but neither of us said a word. I kept my eyes down and left. I used to like that restaurant because they had good beer at affordable prices, but after that night, I never returned. Story 19. I had a childhood friend come to stay with my wife and me at our house. He came to visit from Rochester with his newborn son. He had gotten involved with a girl who had a rough background and carried a lot of problems. He stayed with us for about a week and told us things were not working out well with her. We kindly offered our place so he could get away from her and start over. Eventually, they decided to get back together and were looking to move back into town, but they still needed somewhere to stay. That was not the original plan, but they offered to pay rent and help with utilities. This was in November when they moved in, and it lasted until February. They claimed they applied for jobs but never seemed to find anything. They had food stamps, yet instead of buying healthy food for themselves and their 6-month-old, they would buy junk food from the corner store. The mother constantly made disturbing comments, even about my elderly pet, and she would scream at the baby to be quiet while the father played video games. They ignored the baby crying so they could do whatever they wanted. Things quickly became unbearable. So my wife and I finally gave them 1 week to leave. When the week was up, they still had not moved out, acting like they did not believe we would actually follow through. So we told them they had to go. They tried to play tough, talking about rights and threatening court. I told them they could take me to court if they wanted, but I would hire better representation, and the court would see how they treated their child. That shut them down. My wife and her best friend had to clear out their room, since I was overwhelmed with work that week. They found old food containers, pills scattered around where the baby could have reached them, and even cans filled with urine left on the floor. It was by far the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. Needless to say, I cut both of them out of my life completely. My wife and I got married at the end of June, and this guy had the audacity to send me a message on Facebook congratulating me. I immediately deleted it and blocked him. Story 20. I was once out at a work lunch with 2 coworkers and our CEO. At the time, it was a small, tight-knit company, so the lunch itself was nothing unusual. We were in a downtown area grabbing a few burgers. The walk back usually took us through the main downtown 3-way intersection. My coworker was going on about some work-related matter, but I was not paying much attention, more focused on the traffic and looking both ways before crossing the street. On the other side, there is an alleyway we had to pass. The walls are old brick, the kind you see in a historic downtown, with bushes lining one side, unkempt and ratty. The alleyway is never pleasant, cigarette butts and old bottles scattered around. As we reached the other side, I felt an arm block my path. I looked down and saw my CEO holding us back. He was staring straight ahead, and the 4 of us joined him in a stunned silence. There in the middle of the alley was a homeless woman, stumbling, looking disheveled. She was leaning forward slightly, pants lowered, and she began relieving herself right there in the open. The stream flowed straight into her clothing, spreading until it puddled beneath her. The stench quickly became unbearable. My CEO turned green after only seconds of watching. When she finished, she pulled up her pants and wandered off. Without saying a word, we all decided to take the long way back. Story 21. When I was in college, I was invited by a girl, let's call her T, to a party. I worked that night, so I arrived late. It was the sketchiest trailer house I had ever seen. When I walked in, T and her friend K were both completely drunk and out of control. The party consisted of me, T, K, one other guy my age, K's father, who sat in a recliner all night making inappropriate remarks, and a toddler running around in a diaper. T wanted to be with me, and the other guy had apparently been invited to pair off with K. But he was more interested in T, so he spent much of the night trying to pick a fight with me. At one point, he took K outside while T pulled me into a room. She tried to go further with me, but when her little one wandered in, I told her to stop. She brushed it off, saying it did not matter. But that was when I decided I had had enough. Instead of leaving immediately, I ended up holding T's hair while she vomited, then giving her a shower to clean up and putting both her and K to bed. After that, I drove the other guy home since he was far too drunk to drive himself. Long story short, a few days later I got a call from the health department telling me to get tested for something after reports from that party. Thankfully, I was clean. Story 22. I lived in Germany in the military for 4 years. My roommate was a 6'7" black guy. If you do not know, German girls loved American soldiers, and he received attention everywhere we went. He was a cool guy, but a little socially awkward and did not always know how to handle it. At Oktoberfest in Munich, a Turkish girl ran up to us wearing an I Heart New York shirt and practically threw herself at my buddy. A third friend of ours, a German, translated her words to him. "I have to prove I am the biggest. I will do anything, even for a bag of roasted peanuts." Being the wingman, I bought the peanuts, and the 5 of us went behind the tents. What followed was one of the strangest and saddest scenes I have ever witnessed. She carried on with him right there in the mud, while her friend and I shared the peanuts like it was popcorn at a movie theater. Halfway through, she gagged, saying something to her friend, which was translated as her asking if she had won the bet. Later that evening, when we were getting on the train back to base, we saw her again with 2 other men. She went to the back of the car with them, and her friends stood by watching silently. My buddy and I just shook our heads. I told him he might as well have stuck his pride into a sewer. From that day on, we called him Sewer Guy. As bizarre as it all was, he was still one of the coolest people I knew. Story 23. After a professional night of heavy drinking at our old local pub, a friend and I left and headed home. A few doors down, we noticed a body lying in front of a house. In our confused state, we decided to investigate and assist the poor man, who was clearly very drunk. We managed to sit him up, and he assured us it was his house and that he had been drinking all day because his football team had lost, but that he was fine. Convinced he was okay enough to get inside, we helped him up to the door and started again on our way. Then we heard a loud bang as he fell into his front door head first. Suddenly, he began loudly relieving himself against his own door, balancing by pressing his forehead to it. We stood there, mouths open in shock. After some time, he finished, turned, and smirked at us as he inserted his key and waved his hand at the handle to open the door, before falling over again in the mess he had made. He let out a fanciful and mournful groan. We continued walking away. He was wearing a suit. Story 24. I work at a bar in a college town, so we tend to see some pretty wild things. Fights, flashing, lack of clothing, drugs, you name it. But what happened a couple of weeks ago takes the cake. It was a slow night, just me and my bar manager Jake closing by ourselves. We had a classic third wheel situation. A guy and girl both heavily intoxicated and their sober female friend acting as the watchdog. After cutting the couple off and giving them water, their friend left to use the restroom. Within seconds, the other 2 were all over each other. Pretty standard behavior, all things considered. Jake and I continued closing, wiping bar tops and cleaning the wells. As Jake walked around to start stacking stools, he came within a few feet of them. He stopped, approached, and began gently encouraging them to get themselves together. At first, I thought nothing of it, but when he came back behind the bar, he told me what he had really seen. The girl had her underwear down around her ankles, and the guy was clumsily trying to take things further right there in the bar. At that moment, their friend returned and immediately escorted them both out. Jake and I just looked at each other and burst out laughing. It instantly became one of the craziest stories we added to our collection. Story 25. I used to be a lifeguard at a really trashy water park. The hot tub was notorious for people behaving badly. To put it in context, the hot tub was shaped like a giant donut, with an island in the middle that had seats along every edge. We sat on buckets as lifeguards, keeping watch. One day I saw a couple sitting with their backs to me on the island. Normally we walked around every so often to check blind spots, so I circled the tub. As I came around to face them, I saw the girl's hand down the guy's pants, moving quickly. They had no idea I was right in front of them, clearly visible. I blew my whistle louder than I ever had in my life and followed it up with, "Ma'am, could you please remove your hand and exit the hot tub?" The worst part was that this was not even the grossest thing I had ever seen working there, but it was by far the trashiest. Story 26. The trashiest thing I have ever seen was the night I was almost pressured into doing drugs and then witnessed a man break a pumpkin over another person's head. This happened in the fall. close to Halloween, a few years ago. I worked for an oil and gas company in Denver, specifically selling drill bits. We had an important client from North Dakota who could buy $1 million worth of product a month when his rigs were running. So he was a customer you kept happy. We took him go-karting, had pizza, beer, and a good time. Later, we went to a bar across from Coors Field. After hours of drinking, he became pushy, insisting we go back to his place to do drugs with him, or he would never buy from us again. He was essentially saying if we did not join, the company could lose millions in sales. I was trying to avoid it because I was not about to do that. Then chaos broke out. His wife, her friend, and another guy were thrown out of the bar for using in the bathroom. While he chased after them, my friend and I slipped out the back. We then met up with some other clients from Alaska at a dive bar. There, things went from bad to worse. A group of men were mocking another guy, saying his girlfriend was too attractive for him. Suddenly, one of them grabbed a pumpkin used as decoration and smashed it over the boyfriend's head. A full fight broke out, fists flying. I called it quits at that point. I had been drinking since the afternoon, and it was nearly 3 in the morning. I took a taxi home, still processing everything, being blackmailed into drugs, and then seeing a man struck with a pumpkin in a drunken brawl. It was the trashiest night of my career, and a big reason I do not miss that industry. Story 27. I work as a security officer in a large United States casino, so I deal with unpleasant behavior on duty all the time. It never really phases me, because even the classiest of people can turn into a mess after a few drinks. My most memorable trashy story actually happened when I had just finished a 10-hour shift. A few coworkers and I were walking along the back of the casino to the parking garage. It was about 3 in the morning, meaning graveyard shift had taken over, and 2 things were common then: arrests and vomit. As we were walking, I noticed a blonde woman sitting in a large puddle of her own vomit, being consoled by her boyfriend. We minded our own business, talking among ourselves, when suddenly the woman spit directly onto my leg. I looked down at her, shocked, and she drunkenly shouted, "Forget you!" I turned and asked why she had done that, and she muttered, "You judged me." Her boyfriend began telling me to mind my own business and leave her alone. I informed them that what she had done was a crime, and that if they wanted to keep pushing, I could easily call a uniformed officer to have her arrested. She immediately burst into tears, crying, "You don't know my story. My mom has a boyfriend and is leaving my dad." To this day, I do not understand how that was supposed to explain spitting on me, but it was certainly unforgettable. Story 28. I was working security outside on Halloween one year. It was 25 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing cold. A woman came by wearing only body paint, asking to use the restroom or to come in and get warm. I had to turn her away because my job that night was strictly to monitor the entrance. She squatted down right in front of me, relieved herself everywhere, and had nothing to wipe with, so when she stood up, it just dripped down her legs. An hour later, she came back to ask again. This time, I managed to chase her farther away, where she leaned against a wall and repeated the same thing. At that very moment, a random man walking by decided to do the same against the wall right next to her. The 2 of them ended up splashing each other without even realizing it. Before he was even finished, she reached up and started acting inappropriately with him. They clearly did not know each other, judging from the awkward interaction afterward, but they were too drunk to care. Later, she walked by again, and it was obvious from her smeared body paint what had happened. And remember, it was 25 degrees, so everything had frozen in her hair and down her leg. That was the last Halloween shift I ever worked as security. I was not paid nearly enough to deal with that kind of chaos. Story 29. I once asked out a guy I met at a college dance party. He was nice and sweet, slightly shy, which I found cute. When he showed up to our first date, he said, "Hi, this is my friend." He did not have a car, so she had driven him and decided to tag along. Our date instantly became a third-wheel situation. She was fine as a person, but it was still completely inappropriate for a first date. Afterwards, he asked me out again, and since he had been sweet, I gave him a second chance. For our second date, he showed up with 5 friends. This time the first girl was not there, but the group as a whole was some of the roughest people I had ever met. The first thing they asked was, "Where can we drink?" They led us to a parking deck to drink, and I was just expected to follow along. Their conversations were crude and uncomfortable, while I had expected a normal date. Eventually, I convinced him to walk with me away from the group. We finally had 5 minutes of private conversation, and it was actually going well until he decided to unload all his personal baggage. He went on about his ex, how it had been abusive, and how, when he saw me on the dance floor, he thought I was the one. It was overwhelming. When we returned to his friends, things got even worse. One of the girls in the group casually pulled down her pants and relieved herself right in front of everyone. She was not even drunk. She just did not care. Nobody else in the group batted an eye. At that moment, I realized the entire situation was a disaster. Story 30. A few months ago, I came home from a late game night around midnight. I heard fighting from the couple above me and paused to listen, making sure it wasn't violent. It sounded like arguing, so I went about my business. A little while later, I heard a loud thud, someone hitting the floor, followed by shouting, "You pushed me!" "I did not," and more yelling. Soon after, I saw the man cross in front of my window. Since I recognized him as my upstairs neighbor's partner, I asked if everything was okay. He said his girlfriend was just drunk and needed to sleep it off, so he was leaving. Fine. At least no one seemed in danger. I went to bed. Fast forward about 2 hours, and I woke up to the sound of water splashing. My feet were cold. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized water was pouring from the light fixture in my bedroom. I jumped out of bed, turned on the light without thinking, and saw water streaming into my living room too. The carpet around my bed, into the bathroom, and even into the living room was completely soaked. Panicking, I grabbed my robe and covered my computer, then ran upstairs and pounded on my neighbor's door. No answer. I kept shouting, "Hello? Ma'am?" Still nothing. Finally, I heard a child crying on the other side of the door. The sobs grew louder, and soon little fists pounded back. A toddler, old enough to walk, crying uncontrollably, trying to open the door. At last, the lock turned, and a girl not even 3 years old opened the door, tears streaming down her red face. She took my hand and led me inside. The carpet was soaked, water flooding toward the bathroom. I rushed in and found her mother lying in the bathtub, dazed. I shouted, "Ma'am, your apartment is flooded. It's pouring into mine downstairs." She slowly turned her head, confused but conscious. I pointed at the running faucet, water nearly ankle deep. She stared as if she couldn't understand. She muttered, "I don't know why it would do that. I don't even have the plug in the drain." I was baffled. Something was clearly off. Finally, after I insisted, she climbed out of the tub and shut off the water. I called emergency maintenance, set down buckets and pots, and spent until the next afternoon trying to dry everything out, swapping towels, borrowing fans, anything to keep the place livable. My mattress was ruined. Maintenance later told me this neighbor had been drinking heavily all night, screaming at residents, throwing bottles, breaking windows, nearly hitting cars, and shouting at people. To this day, I can't imagine anything worse than a parent being so out of control that their sobbing toddler ends up answering the door to a flooded apartment. Story 31. I had an appointment to list a few acres of land for sale in the country. When I arrived, I drove up to a mobile home that looked almost like a caricature of a southern trailer. The yard was filled with plastic statues and old items turned into planters. Half of a bathtub, a toilet, and several tires had all been arranged as part of the decor. As I started up the steps to a poorly built front porch, a woman shouted from inside, "Just step over them rats and come on in. I can't get to the door." Her voice trailed off into a harsh, hacking cough. I froze as soon as I heard rats, but it turned out to be a large dinner plate piled high with dead ones, sitting right by the door. Somehow, I found the courage to step over it and continue inside, not knowing what else I might encounter. The smell hit me first as my eyes adjusted to the dim light. It was a mixture of stale cigarette smoke and rancid grease, with a sharp undercurrent of dampness and menthol. The woman kept talking as I tried to hide my reaction. She apologized for the rats, explaining that Earl had caught them last night and was supposed to throw them in the creek before they started smelling. He'd be home soon, she added. Incredibly, it only went downhill from there. Story 32. When my wife and I had just started dating, she lived in an apartment outside a large city in our state. She was originally from a smaller town a few hours away, and she often told me stories about her niece, who had 2 young children, but lived a very unstable lifestyle. She had her first child at 16, and for her youngest, she had multiple paternity tests done, but still didn't know who the father was. One night, I came over for dinner. My car was in the shop, so I was driving a spare vehicle my parents own. My wife mentioned that her niece was on her way to visit a man she had just met online and was bringing her kids along. When the niece arrived, it was clear the kids hadn't bathed in days. My wife immediately took them to the bathroom, cleaned them up, and put their clothes in the wash. At dinner, the niece told her 5-year-old daughter to share the surprise. The little girl proudly announced they were going to meet their new daddy. I felt sick to my stomach. None of them had even met this man before. It turned out she had only spoken with him a week earlier, and he lived 3 hours away. Later, she mentioned she had even gotten a ticket for expired registration on the way there. Despite my wife begging her to leave the kids with us, she refused. Looking back, it seemed like she believed bringing her children would somehow convince the man to stay with her. Unsurprisingly, it didn't. A week later, after I had returned the spare car to my parents, my dad noticed that the registration sticker was missing. My wife immediately suspected her niece. She called a cousin of hers who was a deputy sheriff in their hometown. Sure enough, the deputy confirmed that the sticker on the niece's car didn't match her tag, and it traced back to my dad. She was ticketed for having a stolen sticker and called my wife in fury, blaming her. A few years later, she ended up losing custody of her 3 children. She married a man in the Navy who wasn't the father of her youngest, but while he was deployed, she let another man move into their home. One night, after she went out and failed to return, this man called 911 because the children were left alone. Before officers arrived, she came home intoxicated and passed out on the floor. The house was in disarray, dirty laundry everywhere, animals inside, and no proper care for the kids. When officers tried to wake her, she became aggressive and was arrested. Now my wife and I have custody of the 2 oldest children, and my wife's aunt has custody of the youngest. Meanwhile, the niece lives in a small camper up north and often posts online, claiming she misses her kids and wants them back, while also blaming us for everything. At one point, she was even arrested for identity theft involving her own sister. Story 33. I was living in Las Vegas when my long-distance boyfriend, now my husband, came to visit. We were heading out for lunch, so we got into my car. I lived in one of those suburbs that ends in a small roundabout, but this one was tiny. I was parked at the far end when suddenly 2 girls appeared, one from the left, the other from the right. They stood directly in my path, blocking me from exiting to the main street. Each girl had a group of friends with her, and before long, the 2 started arguing. It turned out the left girl's boyfriend had just been caught at the right girl's house, and the shouting match began. The left girl kept yelling that she was going to beat the other up, taunting her, pretending to back off, only to rush forward again with even more intensity. The boyfriend just stood there looking bored, not caring about the drama. Meanwhile, I just wanted food, not to be stuck behind a suburban showdown over a guy who clearly wasn't worth it. After about 5 minutes of this exhausting back and forth, the boyfriend finally noticed us sitting there in the car, waiting. He motioned to one of the bystanders who managed to move the girls aside enough to let us pass. Honestly, I respected him more in that moment. At least he solved one problem that day. Story 34. This happened at the Sitges Film Festival in 2010. The first train to Barcelona was around 5 in the morning, so after the last screenings, those midnight double or triple features, there were crowds of people waiting for it. The little train station wasn't open yet, so everyone gathered in the small plaza nearby. There were a couple of benches and, next to it, a mini-mall with big glass doors that were locked. Among the waiting crowd was a couple, and the woman was clearly under the influence. From her behavior, it seemed like something habitual. She started speaking rudely to people, and soon everyone began stepping away from her. The more she noticed people avoiding her, the louder and more aggressive she became. Eventually, someone managed to open the doors to the mini-mall, and one by one, people slipped inside. They acted as though they just wanted shelter from the cool October air, but really they were escaping the woman's hostility. Soon, nearly 40 people were inside, peeking out through the glass doors, while she stood outside shouting every curse word she knew. Then, in a shocking display, she walked up to one of the glass doors, pulled her pants down, and relieved herself right there in front of everyone. After a night of horror films, that unsettling scene was, without question, the most disturbing thing people witnessed before their train home. Story 35. When I was a teenager, I had a friend named Stephen. His mother was battling multiple sclerosis, and her illness was so severe that she required constant medical treatments. She was a single mother and a nurse, so between work and her condition, she was rarely present. When she was home, she was too sick to take care of much. One weekend, I stayed over at Stephen's place. His mother wasn't home, and we hung out in his brother Michael's room. The place was filthy. An inch of dust covered the furniture, and dresser drawers were lying empty on the floor, clothes piled in wrinkled heaps instead of folded away. That night, Stephen, who had recently moved in after being kicked out of his father's house, set himself up to sleep on the kitchen table. He told me I could use his sister's room. Her room was just as bad as Michael's. Drawers scattered, clothes everywhere, only a narrow walking path down the middle. I lay down on her bed, which had nothing but a single sheet. I felt grimy and uncomfortable, but exhaustion got the better of me. In the middle of the night, I woke to Stephen's mother yelling. Michael was standing naked in the hallway, sleepwalking, bumping into walls and knocking things over. After the chaos, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I went home, desperate for a shower. As I undressed, I noticed red stains on my clothes. It was menstrual blood from the bed I had slept in. The realization made me feel sick. Despite this horrible experience, Stephen himself was surprisingly normal. It was mainly his siblings who lived in that extreme mess. I still spent time with him afterward, but whenever I stayed over again, I made sure to sleep on the couch or on the floor in the den. Anywhere but in that room. Story 36. Working as a lead in a thrift store during my teens, I came across many unusual people. One of them was an older gentleman who visited the store one day. He seemed a little odd, but nothing too alarming. A week earlier, he had purchased a cabinet and told us he would return the next day or two to pick it up. Of course, he never came back. Our policy was to resell items if they were not picked up within 3 days. We waited a full week, called him multiple times as a reminder. He had filled out and signed the standard form for furniture buyers, but he never responded. Eventually, I sold the cabinet to another customer, who took it home right away. Wouldn't you know it, the very next day the man returned to pick up his cabinet. When he learned it was gone, he was furious. He shouted, waved his arms, and stormed around the store. I explained our policy and mentioned that we had made several attempts to reach him, but nothing calmed him down. After a while, he walked off into the aisles and disappeared for about 10 minutes. I didn't think much of it. I had other customers to help. Then he suddenly returned, apologized, said his outburst was due to medication, and left. Not even half an hour later, I heard a loud splash followed by screams. I turned to see a short, round woman running out of the aisles, drenched in liquid, coughing and demanding to be let into the bathroom. It turned out she had picked up a vase that was filled to the brim with urine. It spilled all over her and then shattered on the floor. That man had urinated into a vase, placed it back on the shelf, and left after his so-called apology. I never saw him again, but to this day it remains one of the most disturbing things I witnessed while working there.